I chose to do my presentation on Martin Luther King Jr. He was very inspirational to a lot of different people. He got his inspiration from his religion, Protestant, and from Mahatma Gandhi, because Mahatma Gandhi was a very peaceful man. Next up, we have power, and he gained a lot of power from boycotts, protests, and sit-ins. One of his famous boycotts was the Montgomery bus boycott, where African Americans refused to ride the city buses, causing a lot of loss. Overall, for all three of them, the major goal was to achieve equality for all different types of people. Next up, we have the Southern Christian Leader Conference. Now, during this, it was all trying to be a non-violent thing, which it was successful at non-violent, at least for the African Americans. Although this was very popular in the South, they still had a lot of things that contributed to the North, such as the protests for the civil rights and how African Americans should have a right to vote. Martin Luther King was the president of this, and as I said earlier, what he wanted was this whole thing to be very peaceful. Next up, we have 1963. Now, this was a very big year. In 1963, Martin Luther King participated in a lot of different civil rights acts, and he wanted them to all be non-violent. And some of the campaigns were in Birmingham, Alabama, which was at the time, it was one of the most segregated places. Another thing that happened during this was how a lot of people saw African Americans being treated unfairly. TV, magazines, and newspapers, a lot of people were shocked by what they saw. He was later arrested for the second time, where he wrote a letter that became very popularized. Once he was out of prison, he did the March of Washington, which was a march for jobs and freedom. In 1964 was another very powerful year for him. He was one of the youngest people to win the Nobel Peace Prize, where he donated over $54,000 to help continue the work of the Civil Rights Act. Later, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, which was basically saying that how it was illegal to discriminate people against their race. Also, the Jim Crow rules of the South were now against the federal laws, which was a very major accomplishment. In 1965, there was a march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, and that march was to protest the voting rights for African Americans. Now, at this march, though, that act was passed, and as a major success for all the people there. They were very impressed for what they did. Now, after that, Martin Luther King had a new focus. He focused on two major things: the economic injustice and international pieces. He had a campaign held in Chicago, Illinois, where he protested against the Vietnam War. There, he lost a bunch of his supporters, such as the president, newspaper publisher, and union leaders. Later in 1968, with the people of SCLC, he later organized the Poor People Campaign. And while he did that, his overall goal there was also to be very peaceful. Sadly, next up, we have his death. On April 4th, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee, on a hotel balcony, Martin Luther King was shot. He was later rushed to the hospital of St. Joseph, where he was pronounced dead. His shooter was James Earl Ray. However, his family does not believe that he was the shooter. Today, MLK is viewed as a very powerful and inspirational man. He stepped up during the civil rights movement and made a lot of what happened. He is also very famous for a lot of his speeches that he gave, such as the I Have a Dream speech, and many more. A lot of people believe that if he never did what he did, that the world today would look completely different, maybe like it did during the 1940s and 50s. Luckily, we are not living in that world anymore due to MLK. He was so powerful that we even have a day nominated just for him. And that is my works cited.